Welcome to Teapot Genie's. We're at the female factory at Parramatta, and Judith Dunn of Pastime Tours is going to take us on a tour around all the historical buildings.
We're at the site of the female factory. This is the second factory built between 1818 and 1821. The first factory was on Jail Green and the women were housed above the men's jail. That became very dilapidated and they decided they needed to build a large stone factory here to secure the women in the colony. There are some remnant buildings around here that I'd like to point out to you. First of all, the clock. That is one of the first 5 clocks that were brought to the colony, public clocks, because most people didn't have a watch. To keep everyone on time, they brought in those public clocks. And it shows you the significance of Parramatta that 2 of those 5 public clocks ended up here in Parramatta. Have you ever thought why it was called the female factory? They certainly weren't manufacturing women here. The women were manufacturing cloth. So there was George Mealmaker. He was a Scottish convict transported for sedition, teaching them how to weave. So they were learning a skill in here in first class, and that was the wool that they were sleeping on. They were going to spin and weave into cloth. So if you look up an encyclopedia for the word Parramatta spelt with a small letter P, it's the name of the cloth that was manufactured here. Queen Victoria actually said for the first 6 months of mourning for a close relative, it would be very suitable to wear a dress made of Parramatta. So a fairly coarse cloth. But just imagine how they felt. Look at the wall. I'm sure they must have gazed at that wall, dreaming about getting over it, because outside was freedom. And that was the perimeter wall that was keeping them in. They could hear their children over the wall in the orphanage, but they couldn't see them or speak to them. And a very high and secure wall, but they did manage to escape at times. And against the wall, you'll be able to see that there is the shape of a building. And that was when they built the washrooms for the women. When this became very full and the women were being taken down to the river to wash, they were frightened they were going to escape. And they got from the public purse enough money to build a washroom. And that's the remnant of it, abutted up against that perimeter wall. The building here doesn't look much as though it's very old, does it? But that's because of later renovations. But this is certainly part of the factory. On the original plan, this is shown as building for useful purposes. And it turns out that it was the dead house. Before refrigeration, of course, when someone died in the factory, and there were many deaths here, they had to remove the bodies until they could organise the funeral, which would be that day or the next day. In 1840, the Catholic Burial Register shows in this year at the factory there died 36 female and 44 male children. Not even their names were listed, but that's how many children died here just in 1 year. Behind these massive gates is the exercise yard for third-class women. These were the ones that were most likely to escape, of course, and so they even exercised in a compound to make it less liable for them to escape. They were the ones that had just come in. They were still very unsettled. They just had their heads shaved to mark them as belonging to the factory, and they were pretty wild, so kept inside here. Also in here at various times were the vegetable plots and at one time a lumber yard. I know this compound doesn't look much now, but your spines must be tingling having had ancestors here. I envy you that you had convict ancestors. But look at the compound, look at the height of the walls, aren't they massive? And really the whole building says permanence, authority, we're in charge. And that's the whole effect, I think, of the building of the factory. It was stamping the government authority on the colony and bringing people into order. So remember, this is the compound for third-class women. They would have been rock breaking, unpicking ropes, lounging, squabbling, fighting, attending to their children. It wouldn't have been a quiet and peaceful place then, would it? These buildings in front of us too are remnant buildings from the female factory. The one immediately in front, the two-storey one, was the house for the matron and her family, and the long line of single-storey buildings was storage areas for the factory. And you can probably just see a mirror image of this one, another two-storey sandstone building beyond, and that was the dispensary. And the single line of buildings running out from the dispensary was the hospital for the women. So that's where the children were being born, and women who met with accidents in the factory were taken there. This is the piece of wall that is in its most original state. When it was built all of the perimeter with this rusticated system so that the centre of each sandstone block projects. But these were feisty women, they didn't want to be in here. And the authorities found out that these made perfect finger and toe holds, and they were escaping with great regularity at night. The builders had to come back and bevel off the top of each stone, so it was originally at right angles like that, and now beveled off so they didn't have such good finger and toe holds. There was a great escape from here when 100 women on head shaving day decided they weren't going to have their heads shaved, and they refused. And the matron cut down their bread and tea ration, and they were even more furious. And so 100 of them battered down the front gate and fled into town. And the constables and the military were called out with fixed bayonets to round them up and bring them back in. And the shopkeepers didn't want them in their shops, so they threw out bits of food and clothing. And the women made a little pocket of their long gowns and picked up what they wanted from the street and allowed themselves to be brought back in. They'd made their point. Except for 16 Irish lasses, they didn't head to the shops in town. They went straight across country about 8 kilometres to Toongabbie to the male Irish camp. And the military was sent after them. And I think it's fair to say that they ran rather slowly because it took 3 days for the military to walk them home 8 kilometres. The builders were Peyton and Watkins, and they were local builders, but of course they had a lot of people working for them, convicts, and each man had his own style of working the stone. And that was really important because if the convict overseer said, well, what have you done today? You could say, well, look, you can see that's my work and that's my work. And the man that did these horizontal lines, he could point out this is his stone and that one. This one had very small little picks in the stones. So it's the way that each man actually managed the stone and left his own individual mark on them. And this man, as you can see, his signature, if you like, was this cross. By 1848, the transportation system was coming to an end, and they realised there was no longer going to be a need for the female factory. So those that were able, capable, were sent out to work, and those that were too feeble were kept behind. This closed down as the female factory. They demolished the building and reused the stone to build Ward 1 Lunatic Asylum. but that's a whole nother story.